Chapter 1 has some information that's really targeted at you to just strengthen to you, reinforce to you how important family involvement in schools are. And there's, of course, a lot of research, and these authors are going to try and make that case, but you already know that. Some of this will be easy and some of it won't. Also, they're going to talk about funds of knowledge, which is kind of a new term that that new author puts in here. This is the new edition of this book, and before just one author, Berger, did it herself, but she's added another author. And this author is a real activist, has a real strong political agenda you'll see sprinkled throughout here that we'll try and dissect a little bit. But funds of knowledge, and then the big part of this is child development theories that you'll have to have some understanding of to really understand this chapter. So I'll try and point that out as we go through Chapter 1. Come along.
Well, Chapter 1 talks about these essentials of child development, and this is the new author here, Rojas Cortez, who has her agenda. She has a statement here, understanding the concept of funds of knowledge. And I say, and that's her word that she's just bringing in here, and she'll explain that a little bit. That's a new concept to this edition. Here's her overview, and this, like I said, there's quite a few questions on the test about this. You'll want to have an understanding that. First of all, what is a parent? And as you know, this has dramatically changed than it was, not too long ago. Certainly in my time when I was growing up in the 70s. Those that help these, and of course we have so much adoption, fostering those types of things now, but just a different role. And it all comes to you as the same, need. The individual is a biological or relative, adoptive, foster, non-related, and I think we have more of this, more grandparents than we used to have raising kids, and each of these groups will have different communication needs and involvement needs that will come to you, and then just groups of individuals. Let me go out here. As we come here to the textbook, it lays this out, what these different roles are, and here's the group one, ensuring that the individual size, that teachers must work together with parents by taking responsibility for children's linguistic, social, emotional inputs. And as a parent, and you'll hear me rant about this a lot, but sometimes I don't think there's enough input, and I never feel like I know enough what's going on. And let me get this out right now also. From here all the way through the course, my thing is I don't think they push my kids hard enough. I think my kids loaf. They're not straight A students, but I don't think they are pushed as hard as they can be. They can loaf and get away with it and still do quite well. So when I see this, I would like to communicate more with the teacher about that. Then we're going to go into this thing that we talk about, funds of knowledge. Let me jump back over here. What is this funds of knowledge? Well, it's the role as the first teacher. Families pass along these concepts, knowledge, and grow and thrive. And you and I are the same way. Whether it's cultural practices, child rearing practices, traditions, social norms, family values is big, language, value of education. And I know I've got some of these in my life that I'm trying to pass on to children, and the point here is that she doesn't make strong enough that it can be dramatically interrupted by school. And let me show you where she's going. It varies between cultures and individual families. But what's interesting, let me take you back to the textbook now and show you what I mean, how I don't think she talks about it enough. She talks about what it is. Often teachers are told they need to be aware of the differences in language and culture and that type of thing, and that's true. But even within cultures, and this is a great images here of families, of how they can look so different in different cultures and stuff. But here she goes, this awareness implies knowledge but not action. When working with culturally and linguistic diverse children, they must know the families, including not limited to their cultural practices, child rearing practices, traditions, and each individual family's funds of knowledge. Really, families are their child's first teacher, passing on concepts, funds of knowledge, to help them grow. These concepts are passed along from generation to generation, yes. And for early child educators, the most important understanding is crucial because they understand why families do things they do. And this is the statement that I want to emphasize right here, that I think she's really nails it. I'm just going to highlight it here. I would like you to make a statement about this in the notes under funds of knowledge about this right here. Under knowing knowledge areas, you put a note about this topic that she writes about right here. Okay, and that is this on page 4. Often educators criticize parents if their ways of raising their children are different than theirs, and this creates a dissonance and prevents teachers from truly collaborating with parents. We must remember that parents are a child's first teacher and that learning and teaching occur in the home are great assets to children in school as long as teachers value the children's funds of knowledge. Now, having said that, that's easier said than done, because sometimes those things are contrary to what we do in school and what's acceptable. Now, here's what I'm talking about. It gets real interesting. And this is Rojas Cortez. She's talking about I. It's in first person. And this is added to this edition that wasn't there before. It says, have funds of knowledge in action in different settings. For example, while eating in a local restaurant, a father was observing his son, figured out the amount of tip, teacher's young man, and important social skill while fostering independence. In my husband's experience, his father, who was a carpenter, had my husband sort the screws needed. And when worked with this, and that's what was very similar to my experience. That growing up on the farm, you could do stuff early on. But here's where she goes into this activist thing. I think that she does not belong here in this textbook. She goes about my experience growing up in Mexico. She's from Mexico. Allowed me to learn from how to solve issues of social justice through my father, who was actively involved in this organization or the Blue Collar Union. So. She's involved with the union, but social justice to me is kind of code word for wealth redistribution, which is a big thing in Mexico. And to me it's very politically charged to bring it into a textbook for teachers, and maybe it's accepted and maybe you love those words, but to me that creates some real division right there with those terms that she puts in here. And then she goes on to explain what it is. My sisters and I were used to listening to my father talk about how to make sure the workers would get treated fairly, which is something that has become part of my philosophy of teaching, providing fair opportunities to learn. And I think that's interesting because, so what's the contrary to that? That we wouldn't do that? That's why I'm questioning her, Miss Cortez here, Rojas Cortez, about putting this in here. Another example of funds of knowledge is derived from the interview of an African American family. Okay, again, think about how politically charged this is in this era we're in of political correctness, in my opinion, paralyzing our society because we're so terrified to not be politically correct that we will allow all kinds of behaviors and things to go that should never. But she goes on to talk about this African American family, teach their children about black pride. Now, again, it's okay, but it's a very, very politically charged thing to talk about here. And they want their children to know their history and continue to advocate for each other. They taught their children about African American historical figures, but they also talked about their own family and how they make a difference in the community. The funds of knowledge learned by the children in this family include the need to practice or to participate in advocacy for their community. And again, advocacy is a word for activists. And so it's very interesting how she's bringing that into this discussion about working with families. Now, two of her three examples here are about activism in some very politically charged things. Families who immigrate to the United States often use their funds of knowledge to learn to live in a new culture, but oftentimes the role of teacher is reversed. When visiting a school on the east side of Austin, Texas, I recall listening to a mother having a conversation with a young daughter who was probably 10 years old, regarding the papers that were needed for her to register for school. The young daughter knew English, had to translate for the mother in order to register for the school. Another time I witnessed family in auto parts where the young son was the translating for the father. Father's a mechanic in both instances. Okay, the funds of knowledge vary between cultures as well as between individual families, and that's a great point. And this is what I think in your world and my world, it'll be more between families than between cultures. Indicated above, funds of knowledge can be observed in different situations. Schools or child care centers examples can be found children's play and include language, values and beliefs, ways of discipline. Ways of discipline are interesting too, a fun thing. Okay. Household care and the value of education. Now, to me, when I write my textbook about this, I'm going to put a whole chapter on the value of education because I've taught in a low-income school, and that's the thing that I think has more effect on teaching and learning than any of these other things we're going to talk about. Yet she does not develop this topic, and she does not talk about that difference in socioeconomic differences. Okay, maybe I'm going to rant here, but what I'm saying, all these cultural and other differences can all be worked through. It's class difference. It's social economic low-income families or low-income communities where their cultural differences are so strong because for the most part, teachers do not come from those type of communities, and so they have a hard time relating. And she does not give you much play on that. Teachers can observe children during play, particularly social dramatic play, to recognize the cultural traits, identify the funds of knowledge. Another example includes a teacher who arranges the dramatic play area to reflect the children's experience, such as setting up a neighborhood restaurant for them. Okay, so that's it. She doesn't play anything about socioeconomic differences. And I'm telling you, I worked with very culturally diverse kids. I worked with very, kids that struggled. But the biggest divide in that school was socioeconomics, is the kids that came from low income because of their value of education and fitting in at school and their readiness to learn. So it's disappointing to me that she doesn't hit that harder. But here she goes into insight for administrators and teachers from her statements. And then we get into the theory. So I'm going back here. The different child development theories, and basically three now that they're going to study in the textbook. And first is this ecological system. Bronfenbrenner in 79 and 86. Okay, and it's some college professor that was writing about this. Family systems guide by cultural and historical backgrounds. And again, I'm saying to you, where is the mention of socioeconomic backgrounds? And why do I harp on that? Because if you're working with families who did not value education, if the parents in there get into now the fourth and fifth and sixth generation of not valuing education, it has a lot to do with readiness and those types of things. So systems adjust based on life events that come to their children related on experiences in the entire environment. All right. So here's this, and this comes out of the textbook also, of these ecological systems theories based on making human beings human and those types of things. But you'll want to do a little study of this, of how that all plays out, of the different systems. Talks about it here, these levels. First, that microsystem is the family and peers. And then the mesosystem is formal organization, which is you. All are going to lead up to this well-rounded child, and things like healthcare services, religious institutions, and religion and faith, also playgrounds. And then the exosystem is influence to parents, their employment, friends of family, government action, social welfare services. See, to me that's so interesting to mention that there. That's part of the social justice thing, meaning is your supply, is your livelihood based on social welfare. And then of course legal systems. And what this implies to me is the government. Is the government doing enough? And then the macro system is those attitudes and ideologies of culture, whatever the culture is. And then the chronosystem, time as it relates to life changes. Okay, so that's the different systems. Now, each plays a role, and let's go back to the textbook and just see how that's further developed. Here's the different systems again, and the pictures of that go with it. The levels of the system as we laid out here. Okay. And then this attachment theory, very interesting, and I think we're going to see more and more written on this. This attachment behavior, the behavior that a person exhibits to obtain and maintain proximity to attachment figures. Nurturing environments allows children to form bonds and attachments. Positive parent-child relationships based on establishing quality attachments. Let me tell you some attachment stories. I worked with several children in my teaching career that had attachment disorders. A lot of this identified in adopted children. Taught when I was teaching in the treatment center in one of my former lives. At one point in time, I have 12 students in the class that particular month that were in this program for alcohol and drug treatment to try and sober up and get clean. And we're having a conversation about families as a group, and these kids ranged in age probably from 12 to 20 at that time. And of these 12, and we're talking about adopted, one of them said, "I'm adopted." And so I said to the group, "How many of you are adopted?" And here's an attachment thing. 6 out of the 12 were adopted kids. 50% of that group that were in for treatment. Well, and the odd thing about that is that nationally it's less than 1% of kids are adopted. They're, in a general population in school. So a disproportionate number were for alcohol and drug treatment. And a lot of it, what they're finding, comes back to this attachment thing. I thought my kids had some kind of an attachment disorder when they were little because we would take them places and they didn't ever seem to be attached to us. That you drop them off at the nursery at church and they'd never look back. That the other kids would cry and scream and yell for their mama. My kids never cared. They couldn't wait to get away from me. So I'm never quite sure what that was about. I wanted them to cry for me a little bit once in a while, but they never did. So here's some of the attachment theories, and these are on the test. You're going to have to know what each of these are. Skeels talks about this. His had the experimental group placed in an institution, received lots of attention, later adopted and raised normally. And the control group stayed in the traditional orphanage and retest between 6 and 52 months. Experimental group had a significant increase in IQ. Whoops. And then control group had significant decrease. So they're saying this. This a long time ago. You can't imagine doing this to kids, but they studied what happened if they were raised in normal families and the IQs went up. That's Skeel's thinking, right? And then research suggests importance of nurturing early environment. Poor initial environment can be reversed by enriched personal interaction. Important of funds of knowledge gained through nurturing interactions. Now again, Ms. Cortez could go into this here and explain that is what research is saying too about the low socioeconomic kids is they're not getting this early environmental interaction with parents. Hence their call for required preschools, that the school system should now have to provide preschool experiences for age 3 on up for all kids. And this is what it's based on, but she does not talk about that here. Then Spitz goes into this. He has a different thing about that first year of life in 1965. He talked about nursery groups, toys, nurtured, saw other being nurtured, and then this founding group had no toys, no nurturing, and isolated in the crib. And then what they found, of course, the ones that were held and played with and those types of things, they appeared to be normal, but at the end of 2 years they died. This group that was deprived. This foundling group, okay, and then at 4 years, 20 could not dress themselves at 4 years. So again, you can't imagine it today, but 1965 they let him do this research. This absence of mothering equals emotional starvation. Okay, and in 65 they weren't studying the effects of socioeconomic class because it's very politically incorrect to talk about that. But I'm telling you, when you're working in a low-income school, you'll see this more clearly. And then Bowlby, he has this theory, this World Health Organization research on effects of this, and you look at how long ago his is, 1951.
submitted that the evidence is now such that it leaves no room for doubt regarding the general proposition that the prolonged deprivation of young children of maternal care may have grave and far-reaching effects of his character, and so this his future life. Okay, so Bowlby. All right, so he went on to say in 82, 3 months they have more attention, more responsive to the primary caregiver. If they had an 6 months, they had stranger anxiety, attached to primary caregiver intensified, attached to other caregivers. This is his theory on this development of it. And these folks, this Rudder and Bauer, talked about maternal deprivation to restrict the definition. It's too restrictive of a definition, they felt. Human attachment is a more appropriate term than covers all possible. And Tizard and Hodges, and there's a question on the test about Tizard and Hodges also. So Tizard and Hodges felt that this early deprivation could be reversed. Raised in institutions but later adopted children did form bonds as late as 4 to 6, but, here's the but, exhibited same attention and social problems in school as those who remain in the institution. In our life, my life, our family's life, we have several friends from our church that have adopted children. They would concur with this. We know at least 2 of them that had to break those adoptions. The adopted kids were just destroying the family, and they felt it was an attachment thing. And one particular that we're the closest to early on felt the child was very connected to the family, but then as they went into adolescence and puberty, the other way, it just got so bad that this girl was destroying the family, and they had to. I know it sounds horrible, but it's just some of the issues. And what is all this to you? All this to you is that these could be some of the issues that kids have come to school with. And it gets better here. It talks about this attachment, where it comes from. Ainsworth says there's 3 classifications of attachment. Well, first of an avoidant, an insecure attachment, then an ambivalent. First avoid, insecure, and then ambivalent, I don't care. And then, of course, this is securely attached, which I hope is my kids. One of the things my fear is they won't leave when their time is up here. More boomerang kids, but I love them dearly, but I want them to fly the coop when it's time to fly. Then Brazelton and Youngman in 86 talked about these 4 stages of attachment that the kids have to pass through to be successful. The homostatic control, then use and attend to social cues. One of the things they talk about kids with autism is they can't read social cues. Interesting. Ability to take in and respond to the information as well as to withdraw from it and develop a sense of autonomy. Initiates in response to those cues. And so they came up with that. And then here's these attachments concerns that come out of the textbook that the same guys, Brazelton and Youngman came up with. First of all, parents that didn't have strong paternal role models. They didn't have that. And so they obviously have some things. And again, you're going to want to, you're going to get sick of hearing this, but we don't apply it to social economic groups. We just simply say this is where it is. And I think the low-income, impoverished kids have more of this. Then the second one is they're isolated and insecure parents with no support system. And then busy parents are those away from home for extended periods of time. And we see this sometimes with prisoned and people in the military. My youngest boy had a kid on his team that the dad was gone into active duty in the military for a couple years and experienced some real issues that I hope he can outgrow, but right now he's struggling with them. Then what effect does that have on brain development? Well, the brain and spinal cord begin to develop a few days after conception. Isn't that interesting? So much for the crew that says life doesn't begin until they're born. A few days they have spinal cord and brain. And then develops into integrated overlapping fashions, and then a number of neurons peak at birth, of course. And then genes and environment. Genes responsible for basic wiring plan experience. is responsible for fine-tuning of these. The environment participates in sculpting expression of the genome. That it's that basic, it's the two things, it's the genes and the wiring and the experiences they have. That's interesting. And this is interesting. You'll want to know this, that by age 2, they equal the number of synapses as adults. That's an estimate. Isn't that interesting? And by age 3, their brain is 2.5 times more active than adults. Well, that's a lot. That's moving. And then by age 3, also a quadrillion synapses. And synapses is those things firing across the nervous system. By age 19, it decreases to adult levels, about 500 trillion synapses. That's what happens when we get old. The synapses slow down. Then Hunt and Locker, areas of the brain have different patterns of synapses and developed and pruning. Scosa, Adolf Johnson, they've determined that the more opportunities for exploration and movement the infant is given, the greater the chances of acquisition of new skills. So what does that mean? Movement, and that's the ability to explore. And it doesn't have to be like wide open, go outside and run all over, but given things to experience, just interactions with adults, especially parents, can help wire them. Shore in 97 used synapses strengthen and become permanent. If not used repeatedly, they are pruned. I mean, they die and go away. Language interaction with parents of caregivers, like nursery rhymes, are a big one. In the children's heritage language, assist young children to learn sounds of language. It goes along with the reading. You've heard this said, how important it is to read to kids, even in utero, before they're born. But what reading to kids does, it gives them language. It gives them words. It takes them on adventures, and it develops that brain. I talk about parts of brain dying. My oldest son wants to quit band, just despises it, and can't understand what kind of bad parents would make him stay in band when he doesn't want to. And this is our theory, right or wrong, but to keep that part of his brain alive, it'll exercise a part of his brain that will die if he doesn't continue in some kind of a music interaction. He doesn't want anything to do with music. So I don't know if that's bad parenting or good, but that's what we're doing in language interactions. Yep. Then emotional and cognitive interactions with parents and caregivers, like Greenspan said. Getting screwed up here. 6 levels of developing this. First, the child responds with interest and pleasure to the touch and talk from a familiar caregiver. And then infants begin to respond to a parent's smile at 4 months. And then a greater ability to problem solve, 12 to 18, affect cooing, as symbols that have purpose and meaning, like in the preteen, and the ability to use and affect thinking. Let me tell you my experience here, and I was an old dad. I was almost 40 when the first one was born. But I carried them both. They were both born by C-section, and I carried them both from the operating room back to the room where we were staying. And that gaze into their eyes and talking to them and kissing and loving on them, well, that cemented the deal for me. When I had the first one, I remember we were expecting the second one. I couldn't imagine how you could love 2, but when I carried that second one back to, I'm telling you, it cements the deal. And this positive environment for healthy families, children, brain development based on both genes and experience. Interactions directly affect the way the brain is wired. So remember this, it's genes and experience, because they're finding identical twins still can experience the world differently. I think it kind of flies in the face of cloning that, gosh, if we clone LeBron James, we have another one. Well, it's still a connection of genes and experience. And then these early interactions directly affect the way that brain is wired. Non-linear brain, the early stimulations. So a child isn't held, it isn't interacted, it's not only held, it's being interacted with. Creates some problems. So here's the insight for teachers and administrators. Knowing different perspectives of theories regarding the child development can help us understand their child rearing practices. Yep. And you don't get to affect this, and this is what I'm saying. This is insight for you. You don't get to affect any of these things. Know the needs of the families so that you can help them.
Okay. Before we jump out, I want to just go back and flip through the textbook one more time with you. Here was the thing for Brazelton and Youngman. It talks about these abusive homes and those different steps. A PET scan, it talks about these different scams. One is the PET scan. Do you know what that stands for? Can you put that in your notes, what a PET scan is? And I'll show you where to put it. Talk about the environment here. Put a note in here of what the PET scan is. And there's another one here too that's interesting. And what they're doing is monitoring brain activity with these different scans, and that's how they're determining the effects it have is by monitoring the brain thing. How about an MRI? You familiar with that term? Also to develop it and to track brain interaction. Okay. The genes and environment, that really is both. That experiences that helps wake up dormant genes. You know, I had a nun when I was in school told me I was having a fit one day about why we had to do algebra. And she related the same thing, that it wakes up a part of your brain that has to think a little bit different. I bet you a lot of you don't want that part of your brain woke up, but that's what algebra and foreign language and that does. It wakes up another part of the brain. That's why I say my whining about about son being in band. And this is about wiring the brain. Different things in family interactions with the brain. And again, I think the error that the textbook makes is not more emphasis on working with low-income kids, because that will be your biggest challenge. They can say what they want about this, but your biggest challenge as a teacher will be working with this different class of kids, not different cultures. Okay, and there's the insights summary, but it's going to be critical. This thing is only about 13 pages long, and there's a lot of pictures in it, but it's going to be important that you read this, be versed for the test, and it's going to talk about these different researcher theories and those types of things. Let's go.